Good morning everyone. Welcome to 21st Century IAS Academy. So as part of our discussion, let us see some current ongoing issues and how questions can come up in your UPSC mains and try to structure the answers based on the demand of these questions. So if you look at a sample question on the context of Lieutenant Governor appointing members or nominating members into Legislative Assembly for the state of Jammu and Kashmir. This has been an ongoing issue, whether it is in line with democratic principles or not, whether the nomination process which was adhered by the Lieutenant Governor in the state of Jammu and Kashmir forms under the basic structure doctrine or not. So this we need to evaluate. We need to ascertain what are the various constitutional provisions available for the Lieutenant Governor to act and what are the steps taken on this due course, what are the statutory provisions that are giving the powers and from where the source of authority that the Lieutenant Governor derives and what are the implications of the exercise of nomination of members rather than giving more powers to executive than to the elected government. So all these technical aspects we need to understand. So we will give you the central theme or the contextual background of the whole issue by taking a question, discussing that, and then you can structure your answer, how you need to present your viewpoints. So beginning with, let us see the question. In the context of Jammu and Kashmir, critically examine, this is the keyword here. He is asking you to critically examine the constitutional position as well as the implications of the Lieutenant Governor nominating members to the Legislative Assembly. This is the first half of the question. You need to critically examine what are the constitutional provisions and the implications that were available to the Lieutenant Governor in nominating members to the State Legislative Assembly. That's the first half of the question. In the second half, how does this relate to the principle of aid and advice in the union territories with the legislature? This is the second half of the question. And this is a 15 marker. We need to ascertain this particular issue. So now, let us begin the discussion on this particular topic. So the topic is primarily concerned with the Lieutenant Governor's nomination powers versus the elected government. So this is the central theme, central core of discussion, the contextual background of this particular topic. So what are the Lieutenant Governor's legislative nomination of members to Legislative Assembly? This has been acted as a test case for Indian federalism. Not only that, so we need to evaluate this in the context of federalism, which forms part of your GS paper 2 under your polity. What are the whether the nomination procedure in lines of the federal nature of our constitution or not. This has to be evaluated, and this is also test case for democratization. Whether it is a test case for democratization or not in a conflict prone area like Jammu and Kashmir. And finally, whether this nomination procedure is in consonance with constitutional ethos of a responsible government or not. So these are the basic tests that we need to ascertain, whether the nomination procedure of the Lieutenant Governor are in lines with the federal spirit, in lines with democratization, or in lines with the constitutional ethos of the responsible government. So the major crux of this particular topic, you need to look at this particular narrative of Lieutenant Governor nomination in the State Legislative Assembly, whether there is a balance between the statutory discretionary power of the Lieutenant Governor, So is there a balance between the statutory discretionary power of the Lieutenant Governor as well as the popular sovereignty, which means the elected representatives? So there is a tussle between these two aspects. These are the keywords that has to be mentioned in your answers. There is a tussle between the statutory discretionary power exercised by the Lieutenant Governor as well as the popular sovereignty of the elected government in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. In this backdrop, you need to understand. Alright, now when we talk about this particular issue under this Jammu and Kashmir Legislative Assembly, little bit of background that you need to understand. The background, as you all are aware, the Jammu and Kashmir, after abrogation of Article 370, Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act of 2019 was passed, which has made the state of Jammu and Kashmir into two union territories. So these two union territories, one is your state of Jammu and Kashmir as one union territory and your state of Ladakh as second union territory. And with exception being, Jammu and Kashmir is provided with a state legislative assembly, whereas Ladakh does not have any state legislative assembly, a single house, whereas Jammu and Kashmir has a state legislative assembly as well. So when this particular provisions, state legislative assembly is provided to the Jammu and Kashmir, some people will be elected directly by the people through a system of proportional representation, and some people were nominated to the state legislative assembly. So from each constituency you elect your elected representative and he will be representing your constituency in the state legislative assembly. But in contrary, you also have this nomination of 5 members. So nomination of 5 members is also a provision within this Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act. Initially it used to be 2 members, but with subsequent amendment which was inserted to the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act of 2019, which happened in 2023, the number of nominated members has been taken up from 2 to 5. This has been the contextual background. So in order to understand this particular aspect, firstly we need to look at what are the various constitutional structures, what are the various constitutional frameworks that derive the source of authority which gives the power to the Lieutenant Governor. So if you look at the Constitution, you have Article 239 capital A as well as Article 239 double A, which talks about the Lieutenant Governor's powers. In any union territory with a legislature, the administrator, who is basically the Lieutenant Governor, who is the central agent, he ordinarily acts on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers, except if the Constitution is providing or if any parliamentary law is requiring you to permit to act upon certain discretionary powers. So this principle has been derived from the constitutional article. So Article 239 capital A gives this authority to the Lieutenant Governor with respect to regulating the state union territory of Puducherry, whereas Article 239 capital A talks about the powers of Lieutenant Governor for the National Capital Territory, which is Delhi. So whatever the actions were performed, the acts performed by the Lieutenant Governor, they will obviously be on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. So this principle was articulated by both these constitutional backing. And these powers, like as I told you, Article 239A addresses your Puducherry. Not only that, you also have a Union Territory Act, Government of India, like your Government of Union Territories Act of 1963. This also provides the same. It provides. So this basically resonates the federal jurisprudence that is available within the constitutional framework. Similarly, as I told you, the Lieutenant Governor should act on the aid and advice of Council of Ministers. That has been the provision under Article 239 capital A with respect to regulation of Delhi or National Capital Territory, and this subsequently has been reiterated by the Supreme Court through several constitutional benches and reaffirmed again in a famous case called as National Capital Territory versus Union of India case 2018. The Lieutenant Governor has to act only on the aid and advice of Council of Ministers. That has been reiterated several times by the Supreme Court. So that has been reaffirmed again by the Supreme Court in the year 2003 as well. So follow on subsequent, the general norm has been established by the Supreme Court, where the governing norm is the elected executive primacy should be within the limited discretionary powers within the elected representative. That has been the norm. So these are the constitutional frameworks that you need to talk about. So now the bone of contention here is the nominated members in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So when I say nominated members, whenever we talk about this nomination, what about nomination? So the nomination power in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, so it was directly given to the Lieutenant Governor. Lieutenant Governor has been provided the nominating power to elect 5 members to the State Legislative Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir. So what is the source of authority? From where this Lieutenant Governor derives its powers? Is it in the Constitution? Obviously no. Constitution does not give it. Article 239A or 239AA does not talk about the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So it derives its powers from Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act. We have this Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act of 2019. But it says that only 2 members should be nominated by the Lieutenant Governor. And that too, this representation is provided only for women. Women representation. If the Lieutenant Governor feels that women are inadequately represented in the Legislative Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir, he can nominate 2 members. That has been the provision under J&K Reorganization Act of 2019. Subsequently, it was amended. So an amendment was made to this Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act in the year 2023, where the number has been taken to 5 members. Initially, we have 2 members as women, and subsequent to this, 2 members out of this 5, 2 members should also be Kashmiri migrants. Kashmiri migrants. When I say Kashmiri migrants, any people who were residing in the state of Kashmir, the migrants has to be provided adequate representation in the Legislative Assembly so that their concerns will also be addressed. Their voices is also being heard in the decision making process, in the law making processes. So 2 Kashmiri residents should be nominated by the Lieutenant Governor. This is there. Among these 2, 1 should also be women. That is there. And apart from these, you also have 1 displaced person. There should be 1 displaced person from Jammu and Kashmir occupied, from the territory of J&K. So this is one particular POJK, people of Jammu and Kashmir. So this has also been displaced people belonging to Pak occupied Jammu and Kashmir. There has to be 1 person who is representing this. So this subsequent amendment, certain sections has been amended in 2023, and those sections were section 15, which talks about 2 women nominated members in the State Legislative Assembly. Then you have section 15A and you have section 15B. So this is a statutory provision, statutory right, which means by law within the legislative framework, the Lieutenant Governor is empowered to nominate 5 members to the State Legislative Assembly through nomination. That has been the norm. So this is how in the Pak occupied Jammu and Kashmir, displaced person should be represented. He is 1 member. 2 Kashmiri migrants should be there and 2 women should be there. So this is the composition of nominated members within this Jammu and Kashmir Assembly. So now we are saying that the Lieutenant Governor is doing this in the capacity of a statutory discretionary power. When I say statutory discretionary power, he should not follow the aid and advice of Council of Ministers. He is not obligated to follow or consult the Council of Ministers, and their advice is not binding on him. He has the discretionary power. The statutory discretionary power is provided through law, which has its genesis under an amendment to Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act. So without aid and advice, this is regarded as a statutory function. That is the second point that we need to make a note of. So because of this nomination procedure, the implications of this is it has the capacity to change the composition within the State Legislative Assembly, which means that out of total 95 Legislative Assembly members present there, because of nomination of 5 members, it has the potential to convert majority government into minority and minority government into majority. So what is the case if there is any kind of hung assembly or close nexus within the members? So it is democratic backsliding. It is backsliding. It is not on the whims and fancies of the elected representatives. So basis of representation is being questioned here. So how do we need to address this? So we need to understand these particular aspects initially. Then what are the implications? The second half of the question is talking about implications, right? So what are the constitutional implications that we have because of the whole issue? So one is the whole exercise, the nomination power which was granted to the Lieutenant Governor. If you talk about the constitutional implications, we can say that it is violative of electoral mandate. It is violative of electoral mandate, which means it is violative of democratic principles. So this is the first implication of Lieutenant Governor imposing or nominating people to the Legislative Assembly. And not only this, without acting on the aid and advice, it is violative of your electoral mandate or democratic principle. And not only that, as I told you, it has the potential for undermining the electoral mandate also. The people's will, the power can be leveraged and tilted against the majority government also. So this is one such example, which means it has the propensity to convert the minority government into majority once through a handful of nominated members taking the other side. This has also been evident in Puducherry as well. In 2021, the similar case, the government collapse happened in Puducherry because of the nominated members taking sides with the contemporary side. So this has been the norm. And not only this, it will also diminish democratic accountability as well. So there is a breach in democratic accountability. Why? Because it bypasses the principle of direct accountability to the people. Nominated members, they are not directly accountable to the people, but you are giving them the power to sit as a lawmakers, to take decisions and participate in debates, but it is not making them democratically accountable. So it raises the concerns of, the whole story raises the concerns of centrality. Central, as Lieutenant Governor is acting as a central agent, centralization taking primacy over the federal spirit, over federalism. And it is also leading to something called as executive outreach. Executive outreach, or you can also say that executive overreach. So this is the major aspects that we have to talk. So as I told you initially, the aid and advice of Council of Ministers is the general norm that has been followed in other two union territories like Puducherry as well as National Capital Territory of Delhi. So these are some important aspects. So if you analyze the issue, when it says critically examine, you also look at the both positives as well as negatives and then give a balanced opinion. A well-reasoned conclusion has to be provided rather than taking one side. So if you take what are the arguments in favor of this nomination procedure and what are the arguments against this nominating powers which were given to the Lieutenant Governor. So if you look at the arguments in favor of this nomination by Lieutenant Governor without having any advice by the Council of Ministers or the electoral popular sovereignty, first thing is the rationale in favor of this is it is providing inclusivity. When I say inclusivity, it is taking into consideration the union government is asserting certain nominations to serve equity as well as inclusivity, which means it is giving voice to the marginalized. It is giving voice to the displaced communities. Otherwise, they will be underrepresented by direct elections. So it is bringing in a sense of inclusivity. That's the rationale in favor of this particular argument. Not only this, whatever has been done by the Lieutenant Governor, the nomination of these 5 members, it is in lines with statutory safeguards also. In lines with statutory safeguards. When I say it is in lines with statutory safeguards, the Lieutenant Governor's discretionary powers are sanctioned explicitly by Section 15, Section 15A and Section 15B. So there is a clear intent from the Parliament which is within the constitutional bounds that the Lieutenant Governor is empowered to nominate the 5 members to the State Legislative Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir. So this has been the norm. Similarly, we have several comparative practices as well. Similar nomination arrangements were also existing in Puducherry, and certain northeastern states also. So these are some arguments in favor of it. And what are the arguments against this nomination procedure? As I told you, first you need to, it is threat to electoral mandate. So it is threat to electoral mandates, people's will. It is against opposition parties, or several critics have pointed out that it has the propensity and it highlights the risk of power imbalance that can exist, because lieutenant governors who are nominating can potentially overturn the majority government into minority, which has been reminiscent from several precedents that happened in Puducherry also. This has been the norm. Secondly, we can also say it leads to judicial overreach. Judicial overreach, as the judiciary, as a case has been filed in the Jammu and Kashmir High Court, and the High Court of Jammu and Kashmir has asked the government to give a clarification with respect to this nomination powers which was given to the lieutenant governor, and they have to take a so concerns about the bypassing of elected institutions, especially when it is related to the composition of the assembly, which has the propensity to reshape the formation of the whole state assembly, formation of the whole government also. So it will give scope for judicial overreach. Judiciary can dictate the terms. And also you can talk about the long-term impact that it has, because sustained exercise of these particular powers, sustained exercise of discretionary powers to the lieutenant governor, it can also come up with certain risks which erodes public faith in the institutions of legislative assembly, and it also aggravates alienation of some sections of the people. So these are some important aspects that you have to mention in your answer. Finally, you need to conclude your answer. So whatever the power that was given to the lieutenant governor to nominate the members into the constituent state legislative assembly without the aid and advice of the council of ministers, which means the elected government, it basically sits at the crossroad of democratic accountability. So it is at a crossroad of democratic accountability. It is a constitutional discretion, despite having an imperative of inclusive representation. You need to use all these keywords. But in order to make this a balanced argument, it has to be handled with care. How carefully? Because we need to ensure that in a democracy, the processes should be transparent with very minimal executive partisanship, as well as rule-bound discretion should be followed. It becomes vital to avoid any kind of majoritarianism and to prevent that aid and advice of the elected executive in the union territory within the legislature is maintained. So if all these things are done right, limited and strengthening of inclusion without compromising on democratic core within the state legislative assembly of Jammu and Kashmir will make this a balanced argument. Whether it is having executive overreach or whether it is giving primacy to the popular sovereignty, it has to be decided, because there are a lot of criticisms, a lot of discussions and debates happening to restore or reclaim back the statehood to the state of Jammu and Kashmir rather than UT. Restoration of state status to the Jammu and Kashmir has also been on cards. We have to wait and watch. So this is how you need to structure your answer. Thank you.